ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Human Rights Organization Review, and I'm your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show, we're going to look at 5 different top human rights organizations, and we'll look at the top stories from each one of their websites. First, we begin the show with Amnesty International, as they denounce Gambia's decision to leave the International Criminal Court, otherwise known as the ICC. Now, Gambia has failed to cooperate with African regional judicial mechanisms. It has refused to implement 3 binding decisions by the ECOWAS Court of Justice regarding the torture, murder, and disappearance of journalists. And it has also repeatedly failed to cooperate with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Now, following the announcement on October 25th by the Gambian Information Minister that Gambia has withdrawn from the ICC, Netsanet Belay, Amnesty International's Research and Advocacy Director for Africa, said, "The announcement is a blow to millions of victims around the world, particularly coming as it does on the heels of recent moves by South Africa and Burundi to also withdraw from the ICC. Rather than joining this drastic march away from justice, other African states should follow the lead of Botswana and many concerned African member states, which have encouraged countries to work constructively with the court to resolve any legitimate issues." The Information Minister's statement regarding that the court's persecution and humiliation of people of color, especially Africans, could not be further from the truth. For many Africans, the ICC presents the only avenue for justice for the crimes they have suffered. Gambia's announcement is particularly shocking given that the ICC's prosecutor is herself Gambian and a champion of international justice in the fight against global impunity. So, Amnesty International denouncing Gambia's decision to withdraw from the criminal court, which essentially the ICC helps defend human rights abuse all over the world where governments can't. We're going to dive more into the ICC here with this next story. Now next, the International Federation for Human Rights, the FIDH, stands with Amnesty International and calls for countries to not withdraw from the ICC. Now this next story will be read in the first person because the FIDH published it as if they were speaking as an organization. "Our organizations defend human rights worldwide and accompany victims of the most serious crimes, wherever they occur and whomever the perpetrators. We fervently deplore actions taken by the governments of Burundi and South Africa to withdraw from the International Criminal Court and express our concern that these initial announcements may be the prelude to further withdrawals. We strongly believe that the International Criminal Court must aspire to universality. The ICC can intervene only when national justice systems with jurisdiction do not have the will or capacity to bring justice to victims. As both ratifications by 124 states and continued civil society engagement make clear, the ICC has a vital role to play in the pursuit of global justice. The current investigation into crimes committed in Georgia and advances in the preliminary examinations opened in Afghanistan, Palestine, Ukraine, Iraq, and the UK, and among others, reflect the direction the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC may take in future investigations. Those steps indicate that the OTP, the Office of the Prosecutor, will not shy away from exercising its jurisdiction over international crimes within its jurisdiction, even when those crimes may have been committed by individuals from major world powers, such as the United States, Israel, Russia, or the United Kingdom. We will continue to advocate for the OTP and the ICC as a whole to conduct such investigations. We believe that withdrawing from the ICC puts a premium on impunity. Withdrawal poses a threat to one of the greatest advances in justice of the 21st century, at a time when genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes are perpetrated regularly and rampantly worldwide. Make no mistake, only the powerful and the heartless fear the ICC, not the victims who place hopes in the court when their quest for justice bears no fruit at the national level. This is true in Africa as in all other continents. No one should be shielded from justice. So Amnesty International and the International Federation for Human Rights both are calling for countries to not withdraw from the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because from what we have just learned, the ICC is essentially the last line of defense of justice for victims of human rights violations and abuse of human rights and such. So hopefully we can get more countries to join this court instead of withdraw from it. Now, next, in Central Africa, a raid has left a displaced persons camp in ashes, according to Human Rights Watch. Seleka rebels killed at least 37 civilians, wounded 57, and forced thousands to flee when they razed a camp for displaced people in the Central African Republic on October 12th. Now, I said they razed a camp for displaced people. I'm not talking about they built tents and huts. No, they razed it, R-A-Z-E-D, which means they completely destroyed it. Now, the United Nations peacekeepers deployed outside the camp in the town of Kagabanduro failed to halt the attack. Human Rights Watch interviewed 32 victims and witnesses in Kagabanduro and in the country's capital, Bangui, between October 14th and the 21st. They said that the mostly Muslim Seleka forces, possibly with assistance from Muslim civilians, shot, stabbed, and burned to death the civilians, including at least 4 women, 5 children, 3 older people, and 4 people with disabilities. The casualty numbers are most likely higher because some victims were buried quickly. In addition to field research, Human Rights Watch, using satellite imagery analysis, identified at least 175 destroyed homes in the neighborhoods around the camp and 435 destroyed huts in the camp itself. This vicious attack targeted residents who were already forced from their homes by fighting and had already been through so much, said Louis Mudge, Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch. Deadly attacks like these show why UN peacekeepers were given a mandate to protect civilians with all necessary means, and why they need to enforce it.
Since the crisis unfolded in 2013 here in the Central African Republic, we've documented cases in which displacement camps have been attacked. The most recent case, and one of the most egregious that we've documented in quite some time, was here in Kagabandoro on October 12th. The Seleka, a rebel group, and Muslim civilians attacked the camp in the morning of October 12th and burned hundreds and hundreds of huts. We've documented at least 30 civilians who were killed in the attack, women and small children, some as young as just a few days old, the elderly and handicapped persons. This town, since 2014, has been protected by a United Nations peacekeeping force. And this site in particular that was attacked was protected by a United Nations peacekeeping force. The UN needs to double its efforts to protect these vulnerable sites. These are crimes, and the Seleka should know that they will be held accountable for their actions.
You can see in the video that the peacekeepers have Humvees and machine guns and military-grade weapons and armor. Why wouldn't they use their mandate to protect these civilians? Why wouldn't they enforce that mandate? So hopefully the peacekeepers will start protecting these people who have already fled their homes once from violence and who just can't seem to escape it. Now next, we go back to Venezuela, who our lovely dictator, Nicolas Maduro, has now committed a massive scale of fraud. Check this out. UN Watch says Venezuela has used 500 front NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to subvert the UN review of its rights record. Now, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon and Human Rights High Commissioner Zeid Hussein are being called upon to investigate how their officials allowed Venezuela to commit fraud on a massive scale to influence the UN review of the country's human rights record by using hundreds of front groups to submit comments favorable to the regime. while an astronomical amount of 519 supposedly non-governmental organizations submitted comments for Venezuela's review, only 54 commented on Uganda, 26 on Syria, 23 for South Sudan, and 20 on Zimbabwe, according to a new report published by UN Watch. Although critiques by genuine NGOs do appear, they are overwhelmed by an unprecedented amount of submissions by fraudulent NGOs that, if they do exist, are either controlled by the government of Venezuela or by its allies Cuba and Bolivia. This is fraud committed on a massive scale. Venezuela used hundreds of front groups to hijack the United Nations database and compilation summary of NGO submissions and turn it into a propaganda sheet for the regime of President Nicolas Maduro, said Hillel Neuer, executive director of UN Watch and an international lawyer. Among the 500 groups absurdly praising Venezuela's alleged human rights accomplishments include the Bolivian Baseball Association, the Cuban Federation of Canine Sports, and the Association for Obvious Things, a group in Slovenia that hailed Venezuela's record on combating hunger, despite Venezuela's mass hunger, said the UN Watch report. Now, the result is that the review today of Venezuela's human rights record is being conducted based on a massive amount of manifestly false information, concludes the report. The UN document also reported that a total of 238 organizations welcomed the reinforcement of people's power and popular governance in Venezuela. Yet the truth is that the democratic opposition leaders like Antonio Ledesma, and Leopoldo Lopez have had their freedom taken away, said Neuer. Now, a group called Desarrollo Humano Integro stated that in Venezuela there is freedom of religion, belief, expression of ideas and thought, association, assembly, and peaceful demonstration. Neuer said this too was false. The regime routinely arrests dissidents for the crimes of peaceful demonstrations. And we know that because we've been touching on Venezuela in a couple earlier segments of the human rights abuses that President, or what we call him, Dictator Maduro, has been committing. So for them to come in and basically fake a human rights report so they can get through this UN review, that is huge and that needs to be investigated. And even though it's not confirmed, come on, people, look at those numbers. Let me look at that again. What does that say? It says that 519 supposedly NGOs had submitted a comment on Venezuela, when 54 commented on Uganda, 26 on Syria, 23. The point is that all those comments combined don't even equal the critiques that Venezuela received. So definitely something fishy going on there, and hopefully it gets investigated and solved. Now, to end the show, the Norwegian Refugee Council says the Mosul offensive will not only decide the fate of 1.2 million Iraqis, but the entire country. In the last week since the final Mosul operation started, we've seen thousands forced to flee their homes, families separated, many civilians injured, and others killed by snipers or by explosive devices, says country director in Iraq Wolfgang Gressman. We are now bracing ourselves for the worst. The lives of 1.2 million civilians are in grave danger, and the future of all Iraq is now in the balance. People in and around Mosul have lived for almost 2.5 years in a relentless, terrifying nightmare. We are now all responsible to put an end to it. People trapped inside Mosul and thousands displaced from surrounding villages are in desperate need of food, water, and medicines. As the fighting intensifies in the streets of Mosul over the next hours and days, it will be more and more difficult for humanitarian aid and services to reach those in most need. Since October 17th, the day the military operation to retake Mosul started, around 18,000 Iraqis were displaced from their homes. Many have fled to newly opened displacement camps that are quickly filling up and can house no more than 54,000 people at the moment, while more are being constructed. Now, since the start of the operation, we have supported more than 6,270 women, men, and children with emergency aid, education, and psychosocial services, says the Norwegian Refugee Council. Now, beyond the basic aid for survival, the countries involved in this military operation are responsible for the future of Iraq, Gressman said. That means investing in Iraq's children, giving them back their childhood, and making sure that they have a future to look forward to, while being able to put behind them this dark chapter of horror and neglect. So I want to apologize for all the emotional stories, but I don't at the same time, because it is in the top news right now. It is breaking news. It is currently happening. So we need to hold the countries responsible who are taking part in this Mosul offensive to help Iraq come out of this nightmare they've been in since ISIS and the Islamic State has taken over. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can see all these articles on their respective websites. You can find the links directly to these articles below in the description. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But that does it for your top human rights organization review. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.